Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Amilian. I represent the Open Society Foundations that is in cooperation with the Partnership for Open Society. We are a member. So on behalf of the Partnership for Open Society, I'd like to extend my gratitude to everyone for accepting our invitation and participating in this discussion. You have apparently chosen some seats not very close to the main table, but I suppose that you can join the main table, apparently to have a more active discussion. Let me first of all inform that this is not the first meeting regarding the Open Society Partnership. So we, being civil society organizations, have tried to focus on different initiatives. We have tried to gravitate around the main ideas that we have been conversing throughout our cooperation. I'd like to inform that this is the first meeting in this representation in Yerevan. The next meeting, the similar meeting, will take place in Gyumri on the 8th of April. We're trying to decentralize. We're trying to avoid having everything in Yerevan, and I can tell you that our experience of operations in the regions of Armenia was truly very effective, and it clearly witnessed the potential and the interest on the part of our regions in this discussion. So we decided that we would conduct a similar discussion in Gyumri on the 8th of April at 1400 or 2 p.m. So we have the space, we'll have the opportunity to organize the discussions in that space. Of course, Open Society Foundations considers the Open Society Partnership a significant platform for enforcement of a rule of law in the Republic of Armenia, which will make combating corruption and enforcement of the rule of law in the country specifically. And on the other side, this is of course an opportunity to have an effective public administration, as well as the ensuring of specific obligations to be taken by the government, respectively, in the framework of the OGP. Respectively, there is an opportunity given in the framework of the OGP in order to reach those goals. In the basis of Open Society Partnership, we have the accountability, transparency, civil participation, innovation. As far as you know, Armenia has joined these processes in 2011. The action programs were elaborated for a period of 2 years. They included open, transparent, participatory management and governance. The first action plan by the Republic of Armenia was implemented in 2012-2013. In June 2016, we will finish the implementation of the second plan of actions and will start implementing the third program for 2016-2018. It is also very important to think about the civil society. The role of the civil society is very important in terms of ensuring oversight over the implementation of the actions. For 2014-2016, the action program includes 11 main obligations or commitments, 5 of which are ensuring the transparency and accountability in governance. 3 obligations are related to ensure participation of the civil society, 2 related to the rule of law, and 2 to ensuring public awareness or information availability. In the end of every implementation year, the OGP publishes the self-assessment annual reports, which are then preceded by the independent reporting mechanism. That's the publication of the progress report. The progress report for the Republic of Armenia is developed in the framework of open society, open governance partnership in accordance with an independent mechanism and by an independent analyst, Mr. Artak Kurumyan, who is here in order to present the results of that study. The similar report was elaborated for 2011, 2013. Today it will be 2014, 2015. So he'll be essentially telling us what happened in that period of time. In a short period of time also, that report will be available to the general public for their recommendations and remarks. It's already available, by the way. So we have on our agenda today the expert, Mr. Artak Kurumyan. Our invitation has been accepted, for which we are very grateful. The public relations advisor from the government of the Republic of Armenia is going to present their position in regard to implementation of this action plan. He is also a member of the special task force. A number of organizations have been actively involved since the outset of this operation, and there are also not local but also international experts, I would say international level experts. So we asked the representatives of that organization to participate as well as share their opinions, which they have accepted, for which we are also grateful. That's Varujan Oktanyan from Transparency International Anti-Corruption Center is the executive director, Liana Doidoyan from Freedom of Information Center, and Levan Barseran is from Asparez Media Club. He's the chairman of the club. So all of these discussions that we have implemented went through a very interesting exchange of opinions in an environment of exchanging opinions. So they did not always coincide with the opinions of the civil society and the state, which we're thinking and we're hoping will be giving us another opportunity every time to approach the reality that would essentially be useful for our society in terms of reaching specific successes in combating such a phenomenon as corruption. So essentially, this has been numerously, loudly conversed in high platforms, even in such sectors where corruption was refused completely. Only 2 years ago, I mean, the presence of corruption was refused, but now they're discussing. I'm hoping that this discussion is going to be a rather effective investment in more effective implementation of this process. Hence, it will give the civil society an opportunity to guarantee more active participation in the process itself, because the process of open society partnership per se, in its name, in its title, brings us hope and vests some reason into ensuring open participation by all the parties. So I'm giving the floor right now to Mr. Artak Kurumyan, but well, he's the national independent analyst and is going to present the progress on implementation of the mechanism. He'll present the results of the report on the part of Armenia. Thank you. Yes. Please keep it short. I mean, you have 10 minutes. Thank you. I'm very grateful for the introduction, and I'm very sorry that the draft of the report was uploaded to our website only today. I mean, in the open partnership. We were hoping it would come earlier, but it did not. Probably it's also related to the fact that the independent reporting machinery has a very small staff, and these people have to study the reports from more than 60 countries, respectively. That's the reason that we did not manage it to have it on the website sooner, but it's still there right now, and you can read through and you can present your remarks and suggestions to the OpenGo partnership website. I mean, there's a place for leaving your remarks. Let me just very briefly present the report. So, open governance partnership. The main idea is to ensure the improvement of public administration processes, ensure transparency, ensure accountability in public administration. The independent reporting mechanism is an independent entity that operates with a group of international experts and follows the processes of implementation of action plans by different countries. Now, how is the analysis organized? It starts from assessing the action plan, then it goes into the implementation report and self-assessment report. I can clearly tell you that the quality of the self-assessment report of the second report is substantially better compared to the first one. They study official websites, they study publications, articles, news, they analyze the present information, the reports from civil society organizations, then they organize interviews with public officials, they organize meetings with stakeholders, NGOs, and other interested parties, and of course there are groups of stakeholders that can meet us in the capital and in the regions. It's truly desirable that one of those meetings includes those NGOs that are involved in the process, and the other does not include those NGOs. In this case, these meetings were organized first in Yerevan, then in Vanadzor, and the same way, like first meeting with the NGOs participating, the second meeting with the NGOs not participating. So after the report was elaborated, I'm sorry, well, the structure of the report. First of all, it's an introduction or preamble. The second part is the process of elaboration of the action plan. The third is related to all those consultations and discussions that took place in the process or before the implementation. Then the obligations given to specific parties, the analysis of the self-assessment report, and actions for the next steps. Afterwards, when the report is ready, it's submitted to the opinion of the government. The government takes about 21 days for presenting its opinion. If there are any inconsistencies, they present their opinions about those inconsistencies. They provide also some additional data and considers some information. Then the report is published. I mean, it's open for the opinions of the general public. It will be accessible on the OpenGov website, so those who wish can just download the report and see the complete content. Well, of course, the remarks can be confidential, can be anonymous. They should not be anyhow insulting any of the parties, and they should not be anyhow suggesting things that are not related. Let me just bring the general conclusions. So, through discussions with the civil society, we came to the conclusion that the second action plan was not so ambitious, and the process did not fully reflect the experiences of the NGOs and the government, which means that the government and the NGOs had accumulated sufficient experience through implementation. Of course, the process was improved, but most of the NGOs required more ambitious plans to be implemented. So sufficient public awareness did not take place. Of course, regional NGOs could be involved better. We can clearly say in both cases, the lack of an alternative opinion complicated the analysis. It was specifically related to the sectors of health and SMS polls. So these SMS surveys or polls essentially were organized in a way so that you meet the representatives of the public agencies first, and then you meet the interested NGOs. Well, in this case, of course, the public officials provided sufficient information, but as far as there was no NGO which could bring a counterweight to that information or could present a different situation, then the lack of that alternative opinion complicated the completeness of the analysis. Some of the NGOs simply did not consider any recommendations. They simply mentioned that the government had to implement those actions which they were committed to before. So they were saying that we had to conduct an impact assessment to understand what the obligation implementation resulted in before, then only to turn to the new ones. Some of the obligations were related to establishment of websites. It was truly desirable, as mentioned, in order not to have these websites reiterate or repeat the information mentioned on the other website, but bring some added value. As I mentioned already, in general, the NGOs were satisfied with the discussions. They considered that the discussions were conceptually sufficient reach, and they mentioned that their experience also varied compared to the previous experiences. Through implementation of the consultations in this specific part, I mean, we discussed the main conversations, the discussions, the places where these discussions and workshops were organized. We mentioned whether those discussions took place only in the capital or the government also included the regional NGOs and included the regions in these discussions. It was also mentioned whether these discussions were open for everyone, was it based on an invitation or not. So mostly all those NGOs which were interested had the opportunity to participate in the discussions, but that enthusiasm started to reduce and reduced further because of insufficient awareness of the NGOs. So these problems are being studied through consultations. There was one session of the working group established and held on the 3rd of March 2015. The NGOs organized some events on their own initiatives, and the government also organized one session on behalf of the Republic of Armenia in terms of discussing the application for the tender. So the Freedom of Information Center organized a number of events, as well as uh, some media organizations held some events in the regions of the country. Now, what are the main requirements? Or what are the main remarks related to implementation of the obligations? Well, of course, they have to be reflecting those challenges which were mentioned in the documents of the open governance. They have to be earmarked for improvement of the services provided to the public, better or more optimal management of public resources, establishment of secure communities, and improvement in the corporate accountability or reporting. So essentially, these were those challenges that the open governance tries to tackle, and it's desirable that the obligations are reflecting those challenges. If it is desirable in this case, it would also be preferable to have them complying with the values, which are ensure the availability of information, ensure and promote public participation, improve accountability, and consider technology and innovation to be used for the above mentioned three goals. So essentially, technologies and innovation specifically are related to electronic governance, e-governance. If they do not envisage availability of information, public participation, and accountability, then they should not comply, or they do not comply to the values or with the values of the open governance partnership. Now, the implementation of the obligations. How was this assessed? They first of all studied, they conducted a preliminary, or the so-called desk research. They established and assessed the precision, the measurability, the compatibility with OSP values, considering their ambitiousness, and then assessment by the 30th of June 2015. So in this respect, there are four criteria. Either the obligation is considered as non-started, even implemented initially, implemented partially, implemented fully, and then there are the corresponding further steps taken into consideration, which the government is should have preferably in terms of implementation of the obligation. So every part of implementation of the obligation consists of three subparts. In the first part, in the first chapter, they present what had happened. It clearly states the steps of the government. It states what the government had done in order to implement the obligations. In the second part, it was the impact the government had specifically. This is where it states the opinions of the NGOs. It also mentions what the assessments of the NGOs were, as well as all the information collected from different sources, respectively, reports of the NGOs, coverages, etc. And the third part is related to the future steps, or the next steps. The OSP has so-called star commitments. The concept of star commitments, I have translated them with a star or starred, respectively. Those are mentioned or priorities. These are more ambitious obligations that are more precisely described. They fully comply with the OSP values. They may have transformative impact in a corresponding sector, and the implementation of which may have recorded substantial advancement. So, in this action plan of the Republic of Armenia, such starred obligations do not exist. Let me present the 11 main obligations and their assessment, and I'll also present, just for the reason of comparison, the assessment of the government of the Republic of Armenia in its self-assessment report, as well as our assessment. So I can tell you that mostly, the differences are in 1 or 2 points. Like in case of the third obligation, it is substantially implemented or implemented partially. There are two or limited implementation. Main problems related to insufficient transparency and accountability in case of the second obligation, which the government has considered complete, but the independent mechanism considered it partially implemented. Now, what is the specificity here? In case of the second and the third obligations, and partially also in regard to the 10th obligation, but mostly in regard to the second and the third obligations, their titles are quite resonating. I would say if the text was elaborated in a way, the titles were elaborated, then they had to be classified as much more ambitious obligations and would be respectively classified as starred or having a star. But, for example, in case of the second obligation, they mentioned the transparency in the mining sector. But when you read the text or the content of the obligation or description percent, you see what they're planning to do in the sector of mining. You would specifically notice at the outset of the process, discussions, negotiations, and other preparatory work. This is not very clear. I mean, it's quite obscure in terms of what the final result is going to be. Of course, the government has proceeded further, has done more than it is described, and ensured some transparency initiatives, conducting 2 out of the 4 obligations or sub-obligations in this sector in terms of mining in the transparency sector. So the government considers that this obligation is complete. But I have to repeat, as far as the obligation was not very precisely formulated, it never mentioned that the implementation of the 2 sub-steps would ensure the full implementation of the obligation. Then it's hard to say that the obligation on transparency is implemented. There can be some serious work yet implemented there. Also, because of such a formulation, the third obligation was not considered complete either. It's truly, once again, very pompous description, ensuring availability of information on public health, and this of course includes the financial information. This also includes information on how the patients may get prescriptions. So the text and the title do not fit each other very well. That's the point. But once again, If this was better formulated, then it could be classified as quite an ambitious obligation. So in October, we studied this website, and some of these data warehouses were not very available, but we have information that that warehouse on the website have improved since October, and if we are able to record that, I mean, find those users who visit those websites, then essentially this obligation may once again be considered as implemented. It would truly be desirable to have some information on how many visits they have, who uses those, and the warehouses as well. So that information is also desirable. Another very important obligation was related to the declarations of the public officials, and the government and the independent mechanism considered this as implemented. Once again, quite sonorous, but the government had the obligation to make a decision by which it would reduce the threshold for specific transactions subject to declaration. That decision has been made. The government has reduced the threshold. It's about threshold for transactions to be declared by the tabernacle officials and their spouses. However, here I would like to indicate one important issue. So in case of top officials, their property and assets, there were some actually requirements also in the first action plan, which we were discussing with NGOs and civil society organizations, and there was no suggestion, recommendation / proposal coming from the NGOs to reduce this threshold. So the NGOs were rather concerned about the content of this declaration to what extent we can verify the validity of information disclosed in those declarations. And we'll also be concerned with the fact that the Ethics Commission of high-ranked officials has no mechanisms or mandate to check the validity of information. So on the day when the government published its decision to reduce those thresholds, there was also another decision of the government to provide Ethics Commission with additional mandate to check the trustworthiness of this information, to cross-check it against databases of different public authorities. It was not considered to be part of the OGM, but we have raised this issue during the first action plan when we were discussing the need to check the reliability and trustworthiness of information, and we consider it to be one of the tools that could address concerns and doubts of society. That's why we returned to the issue. There was also an issue of the online translation of the procurement review board meetings. It's done through e-government AM and through procurement.am. So both sites actually have online broadcast of the procurement review board meetings, and recordings of the previous meetings are also available. So if you're interested, you can view them, and this was done. Introduction of the community-based action plans, and there was no, it's partially implemented. Some of the
NGOs have actually looked at this, and it was not clear actually for the NGOs where in the overall government policy does feed this requirement or this obligation. It was considered to be part of the pilot project implemented jointly with the United Nations Development Project and Program UNDP, and for the NGOs was not clear what would happen after the completion of the project, whether the government will continue this policy or it will end with the completion of the project. Seventh and eighth sufficiently implemented or implemented with some limitations. And the ninth, transparency of the school board management elections and the budget. It was done by the World Vision Armenia, and they were satisfied with the level of cooperation from the side of the Ministry of Education and Science, and it was done by changing the legal framework and adopting several decisions of the Minister of Education. Because the time is limited, I would like to move to the next sections. There is a separate chapter on the specific features of the country. So, what were the main developments and events that have taken place in Armenia during the second plan of action implementation, and in terms of accessibility of information, whether they were able to use different sources of information, and was noted that one of the most important events was 100th centenary of the Armenian genocide and signing of the Armenian-Turkish protocols. So there were some concerns related to the tensions on the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Some of the NGOs were considering that it could be a reason for promoting more ambitious commitments in the area of transparency and accountability. And from what the NGOs were saying, it was possible to deduce that if the situation on the border is not well managed, then issues of transparency and accountability could become secondary on their agendas as well. Of course, there were some concerns related to situation in the Middle East, issues with the refugees. Armenia is one of those three countries which have positive approach to the refugees, and we have received in relative terms compared to the population of Armenia high number of refugees. There were some concerns related to our accession to the Eurasian Economic Union. I mean, the accession process itself was not transparent. It's not clear what kind of problems it solves. There were some issues related to constitutional referendum, to pension reforms. There were some issues related to combating corruption and transparency of the government budget. Freedom House raised some issues related to the freedom of media and speech and expression, and also award received by Armenia, OGM award. We are now developing next action plan, and some of the NGOs insisting that there is a need to carry out any monitoring and evaluation of the implementation. For example, monitoring sites which were under the first plan of action. The government has adopted relevant decrees, but the NGOs are interested what was the impact. So at this point, we may say that the internet sites are standardized. There are some norms applicable to the functioning of those sites. There is a need to create better public awareness about the OGM and Armenian accession to OGM. Also, commitments taken by the country. There's also desirable to work better in our regions. During one of the meetings, and there is an organization journalists for the future. So these meetings and reports of this organization show that the provinces are somewhat detached from those processes. The government has already published the measures and actions it's going to undertake in this time span. So it would be desirable to specifically mention the dates of such round tables, workshops, or conferences and discussions. Uh, some of the NGOs are expressing this idea that the government is taking one wish from an NGO. For example, video broadcast online of the procurement review board meetings. But, for example, Asporas Journals Club has raised the issue of reducing or limiting procurement from a single source, but it was overlooked. Therefore, it would be better to look at those proposals in a more comprehensive way and to ensure link between a commitment and the content of the action that would follow in order to avoid any misinterpretations or misunderstandings. To make the formulation of a commitment as precise as possible, some of the NGOs want to see some commitments related to combating corruption, improvement of the procurement system or electoral system, some issues related to the introduction of the program budgeting. I tried to present concisely whatever was in the report.
All right, thank you. Now, I think this is what we're going to do. We will hear the presentations first and then start asking questions, either addressed to everyone or to any specific participant of the process, and this is when the discussion will start. So I right now give the floor to Mr. Aram Asatran from the Public Relations Department of the Government of the Republic of Armenia, a member of the OSP. Well, thanks a lot. I'd like to welcome everyone and the organizers specifically. These kind of events are a good opportunity, for renouncing, ensuring the higher level of interest towards the processing among the NGOs and the international partners of ours. Of course, the public agencies. Of course, I would like to thank all those colleagues of ours that are involved in this process and have been supporting it with their actions and efforts. And the last gratitude of mine goes to Mr. Aftak Pirumyan, who's an independent assessor, and it presents a different opinion. I mean, in a fresher opinion, I would say, which is a better incentive and another source of information for us, so that we're able to see all those possible gaps which we have, so that we're able to fill them in as quick as possible. I will divide my presentation into two parts. The first is the brief in regards to those obligations that we had and we have. And the second part is related to the works that we're implementing at this moment in order to develop the third action plan. Well, essentially, you have to know that both for myself and for my colleagues from public agencies, it's still quite elusive, I would say, rather obscure, to discuss a document that we haven't even managed to finally study. I mean, to study completely, because it was published in its final draft shape like 2 hours ago. So we have studied it in a different shape, and then we have circulated it around our public organizations, I mean our colleagues. We have managed to collect some of their remarks and then submitted them to the so-called IRM office, asking the IRM to reflect on our remarks and bring their opinions about those recommendations which would possibly not be included in the final reports thereof. Well, in response, naturally, we got some clarifications, but the final document was not attached to those clarifications. I mean, the document which we are discussing at this moment. So right now, I will simply refer to all those remarks which we had submitted in regard to the first draft. And then, if there are any changes taking place afterwards, and if there have been any editings, then I will ask Artak to respond, simply to correct the information. Because I went through in the morning and I noticed some positive changes naturally in the document myself. So, in terms of implementing the obligations, as far as you know yourself, the second action plan covers 11 obligations, 8 of which were recommended and included on the basis of recommendations from the civil society organizations. Only 3 were emanating from the recommendations from the public officials or public agencies. I have to tell you that in total we had more than 50 different suggestions, and all of these were discussed both in the working group and in the extended working group, which means they were discussed among other partner NGOs as well. Then all of these suggestions have been one after the other studied and discussed. So out of these 11 obligations, we may consider 5 incomplete, but saying incomplete or not implemented, I would observe this into different aspects. There are some of the obligations which cannot be called incomplete because they're still ongoing. I mean, the implementation deadlines for those obligations is either June 2016 or end of 2016. Why am I saying the end of 2016? I mean, some of the obligations have to be completed by that time, because when elaborating the action plan, the OGP Secretariat had not yet elaborated those time frames which are acting at this moment. These time frames or the schedules are published on corresponding websites. You can see yourself. So according to these schedules, the countries enjoy a very limited period of time in order to implement their action plans. And for Armenia, the time period for ending or for completing the second phase is June 2016. By the way, we planned full implementation of some of them by the end of 2016. Nevertheless, at this moment, we are trying to maintain these deadlines with all of our colleagues, meaning end those or complete those actions which were due 2016 June, or which even some which were due end of year, respectively. We may call these 5 incomplete as ongoing, not undone. The first, I can just briefly present the 11, and then I will turn to the report of Artak. So the first obligation is related to the digitization of the data belonging to the National Geological Fund, state non-commercial organization, and the violation of deadlines related to this population of this data was related to some funding. This funding is present at this moment, and the United States Agency for International Development helps us in these actions. I have to say that it is in this phase that we are conducting the procurement process. After the procurement process is complete, we will start the population or the digitization of the data of the geological fund. The second is the transparency in the mining sector, accountability or reporting. So essentially, that's the outset of Armenia joining this process of transparency, ensuring transparency of data in the mining sector. So this is essentially the formulation, maybe not pronounced correctly. Hence, it is this formulation that we consider the task complete, because apart from just negotiations and starting the process, we did a number of additional steps, which means we had announced through the first anti-corruption session. I mean, the prime minister announced that the Republic of Armenia was committed and planning to join the process. Also, they assigned a public official in the staff of the government of the Republic of Armenia, and the head of staff and the minister, who is the responsible for the coordination of the whole process. So essentially, this process is still ongoing. I mean, it's in the phase of implementation. I mean, not the obligation being implemented, because the obligation is done, but the EITI initiative is ongoing. I mean, Armenia is joining the EITI. So essentially, in this formulation, it was not included per se in the list of our obligations in this formulation. I mean, the third is related to the public uh, publicity of the information on funds in the health sector. We consider that this task has been implemented fully. We also agree, in accordance with specific agreements with our health ministry representatives, we're thinking that some public awareness campaigns may start in regard to just raising awareness of the population in regard to implementation, and in the nearest future, I'm hoping that my colleague will provide some more details on this process. These actions will start and will be implemented, and you will have the opportunity to witness yourself all the opportunities the website is going to provide to our citizens and all the interested parties. The fourth obligation is related to declaration of property income of public officials and transparency in the process. We consider this complete as well. Mr. Kurumyan mentioned on completion of the task in his report, in his presentation, but there are some specific observations over there which Mr. Khudaverdian will elaborate for you with my request. The fifth obligation is related to the broadcast, online broadcasting of the sessions of the Commission on Complaints. There is the corresponding process, and some data is also present on some websites. So I have to mention procurement.am, etc. So the records or the recordings of the complete sessions are also downloadable on those websites. The sixth obligation is related to the investments. This is still ongoing.
Once we approach the end of the deadline, we hope that this commitment will be fully implemented. As of the issue, what would happen if the UNDP will no longer support this project? I can tell you that this is an instrument, a tool that was developed with support of our UNDP colleagues, and this tool or instrument is simply to collect vox populi, to collect public opinion. And as an instrument, it is provided to relevant communities, and then the mayors of those communities can actually apply this instrument using their own budgetary resources. After seeing, of course, the efficiency of this tool, seventh one is to make transparent, participatory, and accountable the process of developing policy. And we consider this to be implemented when we were writing this report. Relevant government decree, the draft was circulated, and it was adopted already. It is adopted. It's about creating public councils at the ministries, and such councils have been established in most of the agencies. The next one is the responsibility to create public awareness about the draft legal texts which are being prepared by the government agencies, and the purpose is to create one portal which will provide access to all draft legal texts developed by the government. So there will be no need to visit websites of different public administration bodies, and you can simply visit this single portal to learn about the new drafts development submitted for the cabinet discussion, and there will be also an interactive tool which will provide you with an opportunity to submit your own comments, objections, and those comments and recommendations would either be incorporated into the draft text or would be refused, but then you will receive a notification about exception or acceptance or refusal. But you may rest assured that this interactive tool will give you an opportunity to make your proposal subject to discussion. Next one is making election of the management boards as well as budgets of the universities transparent. You know that we and partner NGOs, following decision of the Minister of Education, have developed these procedures, and there are actual decisions adopted. We are one step ahead, and at this point, we're looking at the implementation of those decisions. Our partner agency very soon will publish information about this to our working group, and then we will provide this to the public in general in turn, and you will learn how it is being done.
Obligation number 10 is related to awareness raising among the public servants in terms of ensuring transparency, accountability, and anti corruption goals. This obligation ensures the provision of corresponding knowledge to the civil servants in the framework of different workshops and conferences. So, this obligation is also ongoing at this moment. There are specific training sessions that have been held already, and some trainings and seminars have been agreed upon preliminarily recently. We also discussed all possible cooperation opportunities with Karen Zadoyan. We're expecting their recommendations to be arriving in the nearest future. Obligation number 11 is related to the transparency and accountability in the largest communities and administrations thereof. This is as well ongoing. So the partner organization has reported that corresponding funding has been raised already, respectively after procurement of specific uh, commodities. The training, the education of those public officials will start. And of course, the support to this education process will be provided by our partner NGO Aspares Journalists Club. Right now, I'd like to briefly tell you about the report and our observations about the report. So, the overall conclusion is related to the time periods, to deadlines. Just an example. The report envisages a specific period of time, that is 31 July, 31 June to 15 July. I mean, for this reason, there is distortion in some information, some inconsistencies in the information in the report. So, both related to the frequency of meetings of the task force, as well as some facts and references or links. Dubious approaches were observed in the following circumstances. I mean, whenever there are any complaints or concerns on the part of the citizens in regard to implementation, then the independent analyst should bring specific, or should not bring any specific comments or references in cases when the target of the conversation is the public agency. I mean, when it's required to have specific references, links, publications on the part of the public agency, that's where we're thinking that this is an ambiguous approach. So, through elaboration of actions, it was mentioned that the representatives of the government had not participated in meetings organized by the NGOs in the regions. Well, it's not true in the sense that we definitely participated when we were invited, and we could not participate when we were not invited, respectively. So, in the events organized by Deherian, there were corresponding invitations provided, and we participated with pleasure both in the regional meetings and in the final meeting in Yerevan. I don't want to tell you about every specific obligation or the information mentioned in the report about every specific obligation. But if my colleagues want to respond, I would have the pleasure to give them the floor. In general, I'd like to mention that most of these remarks were related to the so-called country context, and the independent analysts provided such observations in regard to the country context, which in our assessment are not related to the OGP process. And this is once again witnessed in the corresponding guidelines of the independent mechanism. That is it, essentially, about the report. Briefly, I mean, if we have any time, I can go. No, we don't have time. Okay. Maybe questions? Yes, but I would like to. Just 2 minutes, maybe 2 minutes to use this opportunity, because I can see a lot of guests. So to use this opportunity, I'd like. Yeah, but Artak talked for more than 10 minutes. You give us less. No, no, you have exceeded the time provided. Well, then to use this opportunity, I'd like to mention that the government has initiated the process of drafting the third action plan. All the corresponding information is right now on the OGP website. We have published our schedule. We have published all those criteria which we will be using in order to select the suggestions or recommendations in regard to the action plan. We have the criteria developed, translated, and even fine tuned, if you may say. And time after time, we refresh our contacts with the OGP support unit Armenia or the corresponding representatives of the unit through phone conversations and email. We have been regularly informing them about the ongoing processes as necessary with the initiation of the civil society and the private sector companies. We have started a specific, not a specific, but a TV program that is broadcasted every Sunday. It's just a short coverage about the OGP on Sunday TV, and I guess Mrs. Doidoyan will elaborate further on that with our colleagues from the UNDP. We are planning the process of elaboration of this third action plan with some innovations, essentially some creativism. We're planning to conduct a study in order to target those sectors which are of interest for our society. And afterwards, we will start implementing some brainstormings and exchanges of opinions, workshops. So all these generated suggestions will be included in the action plans. The rest I will be telling you in responding to your questions. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I suppose there will be a lot of questions. So right now we have three speakers, Varujan Oktanyan, Diana Doidian, and Levon Barserian. I have asked them to fit their speeches in 5 minute periods so that we fit our agenda. Thank you, Varujan. The floor is yours. Well, thank you. Of course, this was unexpected, by the way, but I will try to make it a speech because you call it a speech. Oh, no, no. The unexpected was the time. I'm sorry. I'll deviate from the main topic slightly. I decided that I will have to consider the opinions of Mr. Asatrian, Mr. Kurumyan, and Mrs. Doidoyan, given that she's still going to elaborate a lot. I mean, she was going to deliver a lot of details about the implementation process. Hence, I will tell you about some of those obligations. So, given possible interesting developments in the international level of the OGP, I mean, of this partnership, I would like to tell you about those developments first of all, and this would definitely create a ground for initiating a discussion on the extent of its applicability to Armenia. I mean, how is it related to Armenia? That's the biggest question. How would it anyhow be related to implementation of the OGP in the country? This is first of all related to the fact that in the beginning of March, the representative of the Transparency International Anti-Corruption Movement was here, and our organization, together with a number of other civil society organizations, considering that we are going to celebrate the fifth anniversary of this organization in September, decided to go through and analyze and understand the problems that have emerged globally. And I would repeat, these problems on global level are also related to Armenia, and I'm sure they will become visible through our discussion. So, the problem occurred when we started analyzing the data about the other countries. If I'm not mistaken, there are 69 included in the initiative at this moment. Hence, most of those countries, most of the 69, were quite weird in terms of their behavior. I mean, it's weird that they occurred on that list, given what they do with their civil society sector. Now, why are those countries on the list? Why were they included in the initiative? So there are four. so-called criteria according to which any country may be involved. First of all, fiscal transparency, availability of information, declarations of property, and funds belonging to public officials. So essentially, there are scores given to every criterion, and the cumulative score makes them eligible for participation in this list. So if the aggregate of or the sum of these numbers of these scores exceeds a specific threshold, then the country is included. So the first question: there are countries which present a very dismal situation in terms of protecting their human rights. But those countries, and by the way, you have to know that Azerbaijan is one of the main examples. So these countries were successfully enrolled in that initiative because verbatim sufficed the minimum requirements. So the first question is human rights. How reasonable is it to involve countries where human rights are grossly violated? And Azerbaijan is one of those countries. Because when there are violations of human rights, then essentially the involvement of those citizens becomes a formality. It's not a real participation. That was the main exception. Some countries brought the examples of Spain, and they mentioned that the process is not transparent at all. They even mentioned that one of the NGOs in Spain, which was also an active player in the international arena, sued the government and went through the court proceedings, etc. They're not simply ensuring the transparency of the information on the litigation. I'm going very brief, really. We don't have time. The second is related to the participation of the citizens. It asks how realistic their participation may be. So this is the second problem, which gives birth to a number of other problems, and start is the enrollment ability. So the first action program is of massive significance, but the phenomenon still persists. It occurs especially when the government submits their existing programs into the framework of OGP. They even try to get some funding from donors by programs that have already been assigned a long time before that. So this is considered an incorrect practice and a sundry practice. And essentially, most of the countries continue this politics, and they do not even discuss this opportunity with the civil society organizations. The other similar problem is that some countries so there are also some consultative opportunities in the other countries, but these consultative opportunities emerge when the programs are being elaborated, when the implementation starts, then the civil society withdraws essentially. Well, it's not included sufficiently, I may say. Hence, the enrollment, the real enrollment, the real involvement doesn't take place in the most important issue in the decision making. The third problem is related to one presented by Mr. Kurumyan, is this independent reporting mechanism. The main problem here was that it was being implemented after the end of the first year, which is considered a wrong approach. So these organizations consider that a wrong approach because very often the final picture is a completely different thing compared to what happens in the middle of the process. Respectively, there is the third problem emerging related to the first. These reports have to take or have to occur before the approval of the action program. So essentially, everything that is being suggested as an obligation should also be attached to the reports. I mean, they have to come with the report so that they are accessible, measurable. And the next recommendation is that they have to come at the end of the program in order to consider all those inferences which have taken place through the process, because there's no mechanism and there is no practice to say that this report anyhow impacts the next or the upcoming programs or action plans. This is another problem. I mean, the continuity. The next is related to international and local, we call it task force, let's say, task forces, or working groups. Different countries call them differently, steering committees, etc. So the problem here in most of the countries is that they are not sufficiently transparent. It is simply mentioned that posting on the website is not enough. They have to be actively presented to the general public, to the NGOs, to other participants of the civil society, and they should not be limiting themselves to publishing them online on their websites. This is also considered to be a problem. So, as regards the working groups or the task forces, the biggest problem is that there must be more information provided about the members of those groups and the selection mechanisms. How are they enrolled into these task forces, and what is the participation of the civil society in the selection processes? Because it has been mentioned that these processes are not transparent and there is no machinery to understand how the enrollment of the civil society or the suggestions and recommendations from the civil society are considered in implementation of works in those task forces. Say they conduct a monitoring, they make some inferences. Now, are these inferences afterwards submitted to the public officials and taken into consideration in terms of future implementation of the OGP obligations? And finally, the fifth and serious problem is the lack of funds. It's lack of money among the civil society participants. So, in most of the countries, in the biggest chunk of the countries, the donors are not interested in funding that initiative, those initiatives. There are only a few countries where donors are seriously interested in funding this process, due to which these countries like Moldova, Georgia, for example, these are the countries, by the way, where the civil society is actively supported by donors. So these are the main problems. And now there are works carried out in order to specify even further those four criteria, make them more precise, like in terms of freedom of information. It is now simply enough to have a law or an article in the constitution. The civil society organizations think that that requirement must be amended with much more extensive requirements in terms of legislative regulation, or at least bring some practical machinery into the process. Also, as far as the economists intelligence unit is, the intelligence unit of the economists newspaper of civil freedoms. And the second direction that suggests extension of this criteria is not only the legislative regulation or the presence of laws or regulations, but also the oversight over the implementation. Like, for example, for the same declarations of property. If the declaration is present, and the question is it enough? And also, how many public officials declare? That's another question. So both the quality and quantity are important. Another important question is To what extent are these revenues adjusted, realistic? There is some work carried out in this direction at this moment in order to make this more concrete and present them to the International Secretariat of OGP. Thank you. Thank you, Lianna, please. Well, thanks a lot. I'd like to right now commemorate all those casualties of war, the soldiers that have passed away, and wish peace to all of us to be able to continue such negotiations and discussions in the future. So the opportunity to join this initiative is aimed at that as well. I have to mention that there were a lot of discussions and Tartak made a lot of details. Of course, the civil society occupies a special position aside from the government. And if the OGP office and the independent assessment machinery and the self-assessment report are considered important, then the assessment of the civil society are not obligatory and never become obligatory, as happened with the first action program. Essentially, so there was no report in a hard copy. We never saw a printed version. And for the second action plan, with the support of the OSCE, the Freedom of Information Center decided to analyze the experience of a year, of the recent year, as well as the elaboration process. The results will not be mentioned right now because they also segregated the elaboration phase and the annual process of implementation, because the deadline for us was the September of 2015, but the process started in June, or on 31 of June. So we have continued some of our observations and assessments and studies of the process. The results of our studies are that out of 11 obligations, 6 have been implemented and 5 are ongoing. Not incomplete, but ongoing. Well, some of deadlines have been extended, some of the deadlines have been violated, but I'd like to talk about the second obligation specifically, that's membership in the EITE. And I have to mention that our organization has been in cooperation with the Transparency International and elaborated an opinion that the formulation of this obligation still needs some improvement. It's not very clear. And through the last recommendation, it was mentioned that it did not have to be a preparatory work, but just a continuation of the works started. And this is why, given this formulation, we considered it complete. I mean, given the title, the formulation, and not the process of implementation. So the report mentions in quite detail. First of all, compared to the report by Mr. Kurumian,
We joined the process of developing the plan of action in 2013 when the OGP coordinator during the September meeting launched the process, and during this time, actually, we joined the process of developing the second action plan. So therefore, there is a difference in terms of number of actions to be implemented. So if you look at the main results, first of all, we have sources such as documents. We have first report or self-assessment and report of the government. Of course, the first action plan itself, official communications, as well as inquiries that were answered to. Of course, we have sent inquiries to the public agencies and received official responses. There were also meetings with the representatives of civil society organizations and NGOs, as well as we reviewed international best practice and adopted methodology developed by different international NGOs involved in the OGM at the global level. So I would say that there is a development in terms of drafting the action plan because during the second action plan we had involvement of the in participation of civil society organizations. There were some meetings at the provinces, though most of them have been organized by the NGOs, including Aspares, Suren Deherian's organization, Journalists for the Future, etc. In Yerevan, meetings were again organized by civil society. However, the government always responded to any invitation extended to them to participate in the process. We have to note that we had three representatives of civil society. We started with three, now we have eight. And during the development process, we have changed the composition of the working group, and I would say that the activities of the civil society organizations have been expanded in a sense that initially we have participated at the first stage. In the second stage, there were some proposals coming from civil society organizations. The role of the donor society and international community should be underscored. The role is more active now, but among the recommendations, we insist that it is important that they support also civil society. Specifically, it's the stages of evaluation and impact assessment to see what are the outcomes of the recommendations provided. Varujan Noktayan has said that, which is actually a concern raised by the internationals as well. We do not have a final assessment of this action plan. The government provided in September a self-assessment report, but then we had independent reporting mechanism report, which both summarize an annual situation. And we never had, for example, any final report on the outcomes of the first plan of action. I would jump a bit ahead and state that our center carried out a study and prepared an intermediate report, which we will repeat at the end, and we'll have compilation report as well. But it's also important to have also government annual report and also reports from the IRM. And I would like to state that we should call on the government to be more proactive. They should be undertaking initiatives. One of our initiatives is that the government should have a series of broadcasted programs and should publish information about open governance partnership, and we're not able to find actually in the published articles or in broadcasted media any information or any coverage about the OGM. The level of public awareness about OGM is very low. And for a long time, civil society and open society, a partnership for the open society, was trying to make up and cover those bases, but it was stated also that USAID every Sunday is financing 10 to 15-minute reports on one of the channels. We are trying to somewhat address issues related to the OGM, trying to present what was done, what is still ongoing, what are the outcomes, and because we are now every Sunday at 2020, it's the program called Yerkli Shapat, which is the week of the country. Or you can also look at the website because all those programs are being also published there. So the interest of civil society is very important. Experience shows that the government is open for discussion, so you can sit down with them and discuss all the issues. You may disagree with them. There are so many issues that we disagree with them. Based on our 4 year experience, we still have some fight with the government. We disagree on many issues. Let's change the fight to debate. But it's very important for civil society to be as active as possible to show more interest in this. Thank you for your attention. I believe we will reflect on all those issues. And last speaker, Lemon Borsagan. I believe 5 minutes will be enough for you to summarize your own experience. What else can we do if you're left with 5 minutes only? Thank you to all the speakers because they have presented a lot, leaving me with very few things left, just a few words and then a few recommendations for the future, not to overburden you and actually abuse your patience. I believe that among the recommendations and commitments, there were some things that could have been done earlier without leaving them to the very last day. Although we understand that there are some budget constraints for the government, but at least I see that the government is approaching on commitments in a responsible way. I do not have any concerns that they won't be able to beat the deadline. However, it would be good that in those 14 cities, the meetings of the city councils would have been broadcasted a year ago, not leaving it to the very last minute, because this is a commitment for 2015. But I'm still full of hope that it will be done. So there were 50 different recommendations under this action plan, and the commitments were done only for 11. And at that time, we also realized that they were not very ambitious. They were strong enough. If you look at the commitment of the Open Society Institute, I will give you examples, and you will look actually at the recommendations undertaken today. I would love to see them actually more ambitious in terms of the commitments made, and stronger those commitments are, more beneficial they are for society. And I would say that the government doesn't have money, personal money. And I would tell you that in no country the government has own money, because the government uses our money. Therefore, the government should be accountable to us how they spend our money. Uh, I would say that the reporting level is much lower than I would desire. In some areas, it's much better than in others. But as far as I understand, this project is also about increasing the level of this transparency and accountability. Therefore, it would be good if recommendations about the next or for the next action plan will actually make a higher level accountability a must for the government. And no matter what is proposed by the working group, the government will tell us what they will take, what they will not accept. But we also have our own tool in our hands. At least we can decide not to re-elect them next time. And what is now being discussed in the new draft's electoral code is about the initiative which was heavily used, abused, and misused. It's about publishing the voters list. The issue is that the government is always arguing that they're not legislative body, but I mean we would like to learn from the government that the government actually supports this idea of publishing the voters list. We do not want, of course, the government to usurpate the mandate of the National Assembly, but at least they can come up with a legal initiative, propose this amendment to the National Assembly, and if the National Assembly refuses that, let them do it. What is new? There is nothing new. Actually, this audio recording was proposed 5, 10 years ago, and publishing of the voters list was also proposed earlier. But now, what you see that the government made actually those proposals, and this is the actually this first five items on our agenda, which are top ones, and they all are related to the elections because we believe the publishing of those lists will significantly improve the electoral system in the country. And to make it more practical, I will tell you what can we propose. Actually, first and foremost, we can look at Article 7 and what is stipulated on this Article 7 of the law on freedom of information. There is also large volume of information which is subject to mandatory publishing. To make it clear, all public authorities and local authorities and all those entities which are financed from those budgets must publish annual information about the spending, about the salaries, all payroll, and this information should be published at least once a year. And should be done in a transparent way, which means that all the hospitals, public schools must publish information about their budget and spending. It may sound ridiculous, but there is this law in place. But we are actually forced to propose this because the law is in place for the last 13 years. Never this mandatory provision was never implemented, and then we can simply insist that the government must publish this information because it's part of the legislation. So 2 years ago, when this action plan was put in place, I had a bad idea. I approached mayor of the city and requested the printout of the telephone communication for the municipality for the last 5 years. So I asked them, they told me that they don't have it because they simply receive an invoice from Armentel and then pay about 1.2 million drums a month. So I'm telling them, but it's also possible that Armentel will deceive you. They told me that I should go and ask them. So I went to Armentel. They told me that you're not the subscriber or you're not customer, so customer should come. And then we got 500 pages long document. Of course, the long. So what we have been able to analyze and realize from so about 10 to 13 foreign countries have been contacted from the, let's say, phone numbers of the mayor and deputy mayor. So it's Dubai, it's Montreal, Glendale, etc. Rostov on Don. So cities which are not related to Gyumri, and of course the communication was not related to the city business. Of course, we reported about that, about the fact that it was embezzlement of funds, but no further action followed. So, what would happen if among the recommendations for the government will include that if the users are not covered by the Privacy Act, Privacy of Information Act, information about the Telephone communication and phone numbers to which the calls were made is mandatorily published. And of course, it was said that you are not active, you're not recommending to publish information. So you can actually use this opportunity and add this and many other fantastic or unbelievable recommendations to make for the government to stick to. So we have an opportunity to ask questions to the reporters or to the speakers. So you can ask your questions if the questions is to all. Before that, do we have also time for actually comments? Yes, we do. Now it will be question and answers then. Mufsa Aristakyan, NGO, chairman of an NGO on economic rights, member of the network, which includes 140 NGOs, and it has also an agreement with the government to carry out monitoring of the strategic plans. So I have few questions to two reporters. So first of all, I would like to start with Mr. Kuruman for very informative report. Unfortunately, the time is very limited, and we would be able to receive more information about the report. We would have more time. Nevertheless, two questions that remained unanswered, though you have already indicated that. But I would like to learn from you what happened in order to improve the corporate accountability. You have stated that one of the main purposes of the OGM is to make it transparent. I would like to hear your view how this reporting and accountability were improved. Second, don't you think that when you say that there is a need to prepare a final report, don't you think that it would be better also to involve more civil society organizations, including our network? And don't you think that one meeting of the OGM working group is not enough to discuss the outcomes of the first action plan and to draft a final report? We have 140 organizations, but our network has very little information about the OGM. Don't you think that instead of looking money with the donors, you may actually involve some funding from the state budget? And you can also use the public television of Armenia in order to publish actual some social advertisements instead of commercial ones for which the public television is used. So we'll collect several other questions, then we can move forward. I would like to thank all the reporters for very informative reports. Armen Kaluman, Civil Development and Partnership Fund. One question and one comment. First of all, I would like to start with Mr. Kurumian. Among those recommendations, how many are so-called ambitious or marked with asterisks? And then to Mr. Hoktanyan, for me, the link between different actions of the action plan is very weak. So I would rather suggest that we look at the impact What was the impact of implementing this or that specific proposal? And one other thing, there should be also some follow up of different commitments. So let's assume that the government has implemented one of its commitments. Do we have any follow up? If follow up is in place, so what happens then? Because in my view, implementation of one commitment may lead to new commitments. So this link is very weak for me, in my view. If our expert is able to respond to this, it will be more than good. David Nazarian, Open Society Foundations, Armenia. It's about nine, commitment nine, which government rated as implemented. My question is to Mr. Asatarian. The commitment is twofold. So you have to have a procedure in place and then also ensure the proper election of the management boards and ensure accountability and transparency of the formation of the management boards and their budgets. And it should have been published also in the schools and on the website. So in terms of boards, the recommendation was a limited one. Therefore, the amendment was made, but here again, there is no oversight mechanism in the hands of the government, and we're already here about many cases that formally the change was made, but in practice they continue to stick to their bad practices. Maybe not parents or teachers, but let's say a janitor was an elderly woman. She is part of the management board, and her grandson or grandchild is studying at the same school. In terms of transparency, most of the schools do not have their websites. Only in case of Yerevan schools, you have school budgets on the website of the municipality of Yerevan, and this is a result of very proactive city council, not an expression of goodwill by the municipality or mayor. In many cases, you have only one lump sum, the total budget without any breakdown. On the website of Tavush regional government, there is no information about educational institutions whatsoever. And when you say that because we have adopted the formal procedure, we have implemented this recommendation, to what extent this is appropriate way of handling the issue and to what extent it's accountability to those who have raised the problem. Please, about the same commitment, same organization. There are many entities, many NGOs that have carried out a lot of work in this regard. For example, Association of the Community Finance Officers, in terms of preparing budgets in terms of analyzing the budgets for Yerevan schools and regional schools. Transparency International, our foundation, had carried out analysis of the corruption risks embedded in the management mechanisms. Why you have not involved any of those organizations into this? Or why you didn't cooperate or partner with these organizations? Never capitalized on the information that we have, and you only did this in partnership with World Vision International. And by the way, we would like to learn more about the procedures that you put together with the World Vision. So last questions, and then we'll move to the second. So protection of rights without borders. It's not a question, it's rather an observation about the commitment line on elections of the management boards. So you have rated it as implemented and completed. But during the last two discussions, we have raised questions to the representatives of the Ministry of Education and Science whether After amending the decree of the minister, there is any information about changes in the composition of any of the management boards. However, representative of the ministry didn't have any information to provide it to us. So this issue was raised twice. And my short question to Mr. Truman, don't you think that before evaluating any of the actions, before saying that it was implemented or partially implemented or non-implemented, it's better to carry out an impact assessment, not to limit yourself to a formal assessment of the implementation? Thank you. Please, Mr. Asatrian. Thank you. I will start with the first one. Whether one meeting is sufficient or insufficient, and whether it is possible to discuss the entire work in one meeting. Of course not. I would like you to rest assured that this work was done not during one meeting, but as I said, during Mr. Kurumel's study, it coincided with only one meeting organized by the government. However, there were several such meetings, and as Mr. Kurumel stated, we launched the entire program in 2013, and until final approval of the plan of action, there were 4 or 5 meetings. Some of them were initiated by civil society partners. However, they again were meetings of our working group. We had also an outgoing meeting. Okay, altogether we had 10 meetings. There were also some outgoing meetings where we have expanded composition of the working group, and we have selected all those recommendations which meets the criteria of OGM. Second question, whether there is a need for better public awareness. We agree with you that there is a need. And we were thinking about organizing public awareness campaigns, increasing the efficiency of those activities, and I would like to say that we have a small consultative group, so-called consultative group, with our international partners, and we'll discuss those issues with our international partners, and I hope that in the near future, current situation with the public awareness will change for better. Another question related to item 9 and school budget and management boards. I will tell you about information I have, then I will turn floor to my colleague from the Ministry of Education and Science, who has more information. Why World Vision International, no other organizations? It's a simple reason. Those who have shown interest to cooperate and partner with us and submitted recommendations and proposals took part in the process of implementation and came up with some suggestions. So if the organizations that you were referring to would have submitted proposals or would have shown any interest in being involved in the process, I'm sure the Ministry of Education and Science would definitely involve them as well. The issue is that we have presented, maybe not to your group, but we have at least participated in discussions and we have presented our own proposals, but no response. Before turning floor to Representative MOES, I would like to turn floor to Artak. When we say one meeting, it was during the consultations. It was prior to June 30th. It was during the implementation, but the report covers the entire period from 2013, September. But they're related to development of the action plan. According to OGP.am, prior to June 30, there was only one meeting. Let's not move to individual conversations, but this is also in the self-assessment report of the government. There's information about one meeting. So, in the self-assessment report, it again speaks about one meeting during the implementation as of corporate governance issues. One of the strategic goals of OGM, corporate governance, is considered to be one of those objectives. And OGM is actually looking at all commitments undertaken by the government. So here we refer to the meetings during the implementation that have taken place. I would like to respond to Mr. Galuman's question. There was no so-called start commitment to which Mr. Galuman was referring to. We have simply assessed whatever was written. It was also indicated that it would be good to involve other civil society organizations or NGOs into this process, but that the Ministry of Education was working with World Vision, Armenia, because it was the only organization contacted us, and at least the ministry was quite satisfied with the cooperation. Why the ministry and World Vision did not inform other NGOs or didn't involve them as well? Probably there's an issue of the process related also to public awareness. Probably. Susanna Makian, Minister of Education and Science. I was chairing the working group which amended one of the legal texts to which you were referring and drafted from the scratch the other one. If I start with what Miss Binasian was saying, why we have not been involved and other organizations were not involved, I will tell you, we have been working with the civil society or with the NGO which submitted an application. But the report prepared by the community finance officers was basically looking at the introduction of the new financing mechanisms. And it refers only to budget planning. If the others would submit actually their proposal, we are open for partnership and collaboration. If I would look at the second part of the execution, we often approached Yerevan municipality as well as different regional governments in order to publish this information because we have agreed with a civil society organization that this draft will never become a normative document unless it is tested for sufficient time. So by the end of the year, we expect to receive some feedback with some critique, and then we will finalize it and make it a piece of secondary legislation. Now we have some information from the municipality as well as from different regional governments, and we have no other mechanism to oversee this work with the exception of the inspectorate that we have in our system. And the annual report will look both at the issue of management boards and transparency of the budget. We have made several changes actually in the procedure for election of the members of the board. We have 3 year period, and 3 years is the max that you can serve on the board. And this change was introduced in December. Therefore, the inspectorate is following the situation. If you're interested, if it's urgent to see what was the impact and what were the changes made, we can receive this information from Mars's current situation about the plot could be provided by the state state inspectorate. So if there is no procedure in place, you cannot then rate it as implemented. Therefore, you have to change the situation. The status should be partially implemented because you're still testing it. We have not finally adopted that as piece of secondary legislation, as far as I can deduce. Uh, we have, for example, curricula which are mandatory and they're approved by the Minister of Education on the so-called A decrees. So they are adopted, but we have to test them in order to say that there is a need or there is no need to further adjust them. Same goes for this piece of legislation, and I don't believe that it won't be. I don't believe that it will be changed to extent that it won't be accepted and adopted. Therefore, I disagree that we have to change the status. It is adopted. I would like to say that this report is still open for 2 weeks. You can write a feedback if you believe that there are some actions which are partially implemented or not implemented. You can actually provide this opinion, but in a justified way. Your question, please. There were other questions as well. My question is again about the boards, management boards. As a teacher with 40 years of experience, I will tell you that those boards are only artificial, supporting the further development of corruption, deepening of corruption in the system. I don't know whether you're aware or not, but in Aragodzotun region, for example, head of the educational division is imprisoned with 21 other teachers and 99 witnesses. So it's a tragic situation. Are you aware about this? Of course we are. But whatever we are discussing has no links to this. So, your words. So please, can you ask your question, precise question, and to whom? When you inform better people, if you tell them that this is an issue, if and this is a management issue. If you do not have well-managed schools, you don't have a well-managed country. I respect all of you, but let me repeat. We are now formulating questions to the speakers. Then you will have time for additional speeches. Հիմա երկրորդ շրջանն է հարցերի։ Ոչ, այդ առաջին շրջանն է։ Հիմա դնում ենք երկրորդ շրջանը։ Մոռեցեք ընդունում միկրոֆոնից այդ հարցը հնչեցրեք։ So, if you want to ask a question, you can take a mic and ask a question. So I'm done. Please, questions. Introduce yourself and ask a question without any comments and interpretation. Shorik Amarkhanyan. chairperson of Christian Women Association, and chairperson of Shower Center in Spitak. My question is again about budgets of the educational institutions, how those budgets are formed. So I may a bit move away from my main question, but my question is to the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health. Have you looked at the issue of the tragic situation with the toilets in the schools, specifically in the regions? When you form your budgets, do you look also at this issue? Because it's a clear violation of child rights. Switch off your mic, please. Please, questions. Aram Gregorian, NGO Research Center. Of course, it was very interesting event. We have heard a lot of useful information, and we all would like to see different processes transparent, and it should be practical, and instead of talking about the problems we would like to see those problems tackled and addressed. But I get an impression that in this initiative there are some formal elements as well. If it's about the question, I would say the following. How do you plan participation of the civil society organization and NGOs in the implementation of this plan? And do you plan to have another discussion before the report about the implementation of the next plan? My question is to Levon Barsekan. So, submission of annual reports, as you have said, it's a requirement of the law. So, which law? Could you actually refer us to the precise source? Which law, which article actually makes it mandatory? If there are no more questions, I will raise my own question and then I will ask our speakers to speak and then we will open the floor for comments. Last question. My last question is to Mr. Hoktanyan. Mr. Hoktanyan, you have said that there are some issues related to funding of the NGOs, as opposed to Moldova or Georgia, where the situation is much better. Don't you think that it is linked to the Armenians' accession to the Eurasian Economic Union, as opposed to those countries which moved to association with European Union? And one comment to what Levon Basiana said. You had actually the printout of the phone calls for the municipality. By the way, you can actually ask for an electronic version in order to avoid any payments for that. Otherwise, you have to pay a fee of 5 drams per page if you want a printout, hard copy. So my question is to Mr. Asatyan and to Mr. Kurmian. After 5 years of implementation of OGM, what has changed in terms of corruption in the life of an ordinary citizen? What changed? What has changed in my life, per se? So, Mr. Asatrian, you can, and you and Mr. Kurmian, if you want to choose any questions to answer to, please, and then other speakers, and then speeches, comments. So 5 people, and then I will register the others if they want to take floor, please. Thank you. I will start with the first one about the toilets or the lavatories in the public schools. I have difficulties of in answering this question because we're not dealing with that issue at all. Second, how to participate in the OGM process. I would suggest that you look at OGP website where there are many materials published. Then you can find answers to many questions you have. And I would like to state that there is a working group that coordinates this entire process. We do not have any specific procedure of involving people into the work of the group. So any school that, any entity that has approached the working group to be involved in the process were also involved in the working group and participated in this process. With our NGO partners, we now develop bylaws and working procedures for this group, as well as also some criteria how to involve into the work of our group different stakeholders and beneficiaries. After this all is discussed and adopted, we will put this process on institutional basis. Another question about membership to Eurasian Economic Union as opposed with Moldova and Ukraine. So you will respond to that. And to the last question, what has changed as a result of OGM in the field of corruption? I have difficulties to answer to you. But I can tell you that there were many changes made in the legislation, taking into account commitments that government has undertaken in its first and second action plans. You may see those changes, may see those differences. And I will give you one example related to the online broadcast of procurement review boards or board meetings. According to the statistical data that we have, before online broadcast we had one or two, which shows that a jump after that is due to some positive changes that we have witnessed. So, unfortunately, it's not only corruption, it's also participation. How can we participate? So, ogp.am. You see that on your screen. There is a timetable on the site and information about the place where you can send your recommendations, suggestions, etc. You can submit your proposals at the site as of corruption, and there was no specific commitment related to combating corruption. We simply stated in our discussions that all those there was no specific commitment to combat corruption, and there is corruption index or corruption perception index, which is maintained by and managed by the Transparency International. So they do that. We don't do that. You have to use mic, otherwise there will be no translation. You have responded only to part of my question. Thank you for that, but I would like to remind you There is also a sub question. Do you plan to have also a discussion with society, with NGO representatives, civil society representatives about the ongoing activities, which somewhat involves civil society into implementation? It's not providing you with some suggestions. So, if we are demanding from the government to do things in a proper way, we should do it ourselves as well, in order to increase accountability of organizers to civil society and to society in general. If there are some things that must be corrected or adjusted, it should be done. And therefore, it is better to have these discussions throughout the year before the report is drafted and published. And not only to discuss proposals, but also to look at some procedural issues and practical issues. Probably we have to start telling you from the scratch what is OGP, etc. It's better to approach the government. The government can tell you what they're doing, what they're planning to do. I can answer to the question. Artak, if you have anything to add, I'm not involved in this process, therefore it is very difficult for me to respond. Please, Mr. Asafran. Besides submitting proposals, whether it's paper-based or online, or disclosing your views about the reports, how can individuals participate in the implementation? Is this your question? Yes. The existing practice says if you have submitted a proposal which was chosen as an ambitious proposal, then you are being involved in the work of the working group, and whether being or not being a member of the working group, you may follow implementation of any proposal. Deran Sureli. It's an organization which was not part of our working group, nevertheless participated in terms of monitoring of the actions implemented, was submitting on programs and proposals, and when we published the outcomes of the program, our attention was drawn to the level of implementation of certain actions. The proposal, based on that proposal, you may become a member of the working group, but this is not a mandatory requirement, because you can carry out also monitoring as an outsider and raise problems that you see or inform us. Thank you. Liana, please. It was very important. Probably I simply was too quick, but I should repeat that we need to have also influence related discussions. So, I remember that during some of the discussions, there were some points raised by the public authorities as well as NGOs. We have to adopt a decision in order to look whether the recommendation was implemented or not. And we finally reached the methodology that there is in OGP. We assess whether implemented or non-implemented any action. That would be the status, and other important, probably the most important thing in all this process. And I stated that we do not have a final assessment. So we have to look at the impact in order to understand that. But I believe during the preparation, when we present our proposals, we should have also in mind this impact or a vision. What will this give us as an individual? So what David said actually, what the OGM provided to me as an ordinary citizen in the last years. That's what I also would like to reiterate, and we have to understand that if the decisions are made in the educational sector, they should be understood because otherwise, I mean, you're not able to see what was the impact. We are waiting until the end of the academic year to see the impact of those decisions, and we dig down and we see that the most important issue was with the management boards and their existence. And if we are making a proposal to change some small thing, for example, we suggest online broadcast of the procurement review board meetings, but then we realize that in the system there are much more difficult problems which are actually impacting the overall situation, and the impact of this specific action is very low. Or, as Artag was saying, we do not have as a result any recommendation marked with the asterisks. So now we have reached the third stage of developing action plan, and therefore I would like to call on the NGOs to be more proactive, specifically in this regard, and each recommendation should also have some idea about the changes. Please, Levon. Thank you. It's Freedom of Information Act 2013, four articles providing all the people with different opportunities, and there are all instruments and tools outlined there, including how to receive information. And regardless of the fact whether there is an inquiry or not, those bodies which are enlisted in the law must publish information about their activities, and it is being done either partially or not done at all. And it applies to all public administration bodies, including the government and president office. As of your question, Ms. McCann, this recommendation number 9, there was also an issue that could be conflict of interest not only with the faculty members but also with other staff, technical staff, I don't know, cook, janitor, or whatever. I would suggest that the ministry doesn't need to wait for this project to provide with recommendations in order to reduce corruption risks and address the conflict of interest. If you see those problems yourself in the ministry, if you see that there is a clear conflict of interest, you can simply change the situation by yourselves without waiting for our own recommendation. Please, Varujan. First of all, in relation to your question, no specific ways of saying that who is backing up whom. And I mean, it's very difficult to tell upfront that, I mean, it is related to the fact that Armenia joined Eurasian Economic Union and Moldova and Georgia have joined association agreement. It's not well studied. It would be good to research this topic and then come up with some conclusions. When it comes to open society or partnership for open society, so when I'm saying about Moldova and Georgia, those are rather exceptions. We can look at other countries as well. So I talked recently on Skype with support unit. So we are now, in terms of open society, we are now part of the Asian partnership, and we are dealing with Singapore, for example. And besides funding, let's say, study tours to different summits, no other support they cannot provide to us. So the lack of interest to OGM is not limited to Armenia only. It is somewhat a global trend. I don't know whether it is even more aggravated in case of Armenia or not, but I mean, we have to look at the global situation because globally the situation is quite indifferent. But when it comes even to pre-Eurasian Economic Union times, I mean, there was no financing of OGM at that time either. The question was not to me, but I would like to reflect on other question as well. If we look at the perception index and other indices of the World Bank and others, there are no changes since 2003. This is a stagnant situation. Secondly, even if there are some changes, it's too naive and premature to believe that OGM will help us to reduce corruption, or only OGM will help us to reduce corruption. So this is rather a systemic issue. Why I decided to answer to this question? Recently, in March, was created an OGM anti-corruption group. This was initiated by the secretary, but the secretariat. Next year in London there will be a summit and on anti-corruption, and there is this very specific approach. In case of Armenia and many other countries, anti-corruption recommendations were not included. There were several reasons for that. I So this approach is being globally revised, and if there is anti-corruption strategy, let's base everything on this corruption strategy, anti-corruption strategy. But then there is also this discourse that most of the actions could be implemented in more efficient way if they are done under the OGM rather than under anti-corruption strategy. We have raised this issue several times. For example, asset recovery mechanism, probably through OGM. This could be done. So now I'm following on this, and probably during the first one, we have submitted different proposals, and we will do that now as well. Two short observations. In the third one, we have on the top of our own commitments that will meet OGM requirements. The selection would be made also following sustainable development targets or goals announced by UNDP, as well as commitments to support the development. So this is the approach that we have adopted. Now we're moving to comments. Because our colleague is in hurry, please, I will turn floor to our colleague. Up to 3 minutes, limit yourself. Then I believe our speakers will have another chance to respond. Please. Lilia Shushanya, staff of the government. My intervention is related to different issues, and I will try to avoid for double standards. I would like to look at the issues which are related to us. It seems that whether this was implemented partially or fully, we have an unprecedented experience with mobilizing the civil society organization that are representatives of the World Bank and others that can prove that the entire work which was done, intensive work which was done in terms of joining this initiative was quite unprecedented in Armenia. And when we talk about open OGM actually, and we're still raising issues related to the public development. And in case of this one, regional meetings, interviews on public television in Armenia was done quite heavily. So whenever you look at the assessment provided, take into account what was done. When it comes to the publication of the Voters list, I would like to make a correction in what was stated. We have recently received in the government recommendations of the Venice Commission. As we know, in the Venice Commission, we have the best legal practitioners in the Venice Commission. What would be your opinion about the conclusions? And sorry for adding up some political notion. But when you speak about country context, you nevertheless look at the politics as well, and we have to talk about politics. Karabakh issue was also touched upon, that it could limit possibility for more ambitious initiatives, and it could be an impediment for taking some of such ambitious. So your work would be much more appreciated if you would submit your own personal views and not looking at those opinions as opinion of the civil society organization, because it's unacceptable under the current development of the conflict when our neighbor Azerbaijan, based on their internal agenda, is escalating the conflict and bringing some much aggression to the table, and Armenia, by providing such vague statements, could jeopardize the situation and aggravate the situation. Actually, I'm not looking at many points. I'm just trying to quickly run through different issues. There is no link between Syrian situation and the OGP principles. That it could be. We should not, and we are not entitled to open up the brackets, but you cannot combine these two facts that some of the patents were given to the top public officials and to Syrian refugees. You cannot put them on the same scale, and therefore I am sorry that you're leaving. I won't give opportunity to respond to the points that you have raised. I would give floor to others to speak, but I would like to say briefly that for 25 years we are being manipulated in terms of country context. So I don't want to talk about this. We can talk about it at a later stage. Please. Armenia Gevorkian, NGO, well-informed new generation. I'm a member of the coordinating council of this network. Our network is bringing together 140 different NGOs, and I believe we can bring some ad valorem to this work if we're involved in those organizations and different. للسوق вообще-то просто هواي هاچومم للسوق it is important to ensure involvement of different angels at different levels, and education is my weakest link, because being a teacher with 46 years of experience of working in school, and so-called boards which were put in place are rather formal entities. Even today, they are cooperating with the chairperson of the educational division in the regional government and with MOSPETs and other people. And they decide to appoint the principal or headmaster of the school. believing in the government that the government has put in place a comprehensive program of combating corruption. Please listen, no one is hearing. For 2 years, the proceedings are continuing, but in no place we have heard about the fact about imprisonment of these people. I often go to the court hearings and I see that they're in a very tragic situation. I will tell you, I was not able to stand this, and a criminal case was instigated. So they sued me in the court. I won the case. Then they collected false witnesses and false testimonies from 21 teachers and 5 students. I was actually fired. But the issue is what the minors have to do with this witnessing, with taking the stand in the court. And you now want to speak about the development agenda of the country. It's impossible to do. What I would like to say is the following. I have don't know how. I cooperated with you. I don't know how it happened, but I happened to be at the meeting of the Corruption Council, but after that I was never invited to participate in your meeting, and we were discussing several corruption risks. You all know those risks by heart, and you still continue to follow the same line. If anyone can say that they are aware about this court case, which is already ongoing for 2 years, no, there was no information, and the Minister of Education is simply blocking any public awareness about this. Inspectorate was approached several times. I've asked them what is going on in the schools. The head of the education division told me that so the person who kicked me out actually is now imprisoned. He's uzmem haskana min çazu masi elevor. There are serious gaps and problems in the educational system. So it goes to for boards, for students, for parents. So each and every person is guilty in one word. I have approached the board. The board did nothing. I don't know what else should I say. I would like to draw the attention of the authorities of the government to the situation that is unfolding in this school. I wrote letters to president of the country, to Minister of Education. No response. So how it is all related to this open governance partnership? So, all those people who reminded about the situation, who wrote different articles, they must be heard. So today you have an opportunity to write your opinion on this website. Under this project, the only way to move forward is to visit one of these 2 pages and leave your remarks there. Thank you. So up to 3 minutes, please. I will be very short because I have heard answers to many of my questions, but I would like to clarify just one point. And answer to my question whether there will be a discussion or not is negative. Therefore, I would make a recommendation and one correction. The issue is not to be involved by putting forward some new recommendations. That's clear. So it's negative. But the issue is that to make the work of this working group more transparent and to involve civil society in a better way, more proactive and effective way before the next report, we should use different mechanisms, including internet, but also civil society should be informed about the progress of activities to see what are the adjustments made, how the government responds to different recommendations. This will create additional accountability before society, and my suggestion is to organize one discussion before the report is published during the year. I forgot to thank all the reporters when I was asking a question. Thank you for keeping us informed, providing us with a lot of information, and for updating us on future steps. I would join probably Mr. Amirian, and I would say that there is no way to link the existing situation or the country context with the assessments given. Okay, I mean, the country context is country context. The recent developments are recent developments, but the government has own responsibilities. You are being funded from the government budget and you have to carry out your duties regardless of any critical developments or unfolding situations. And this is what this OGM is all about. And I would like to raise a few points that would become sufficient ground for the network to be part of this working group. So it is related to the implementation of the adopted legal acts. It is stated under item 7 that it was implemented or partially implemented. Just few words. First, the Republic of Armenia in 2004 adopted a law on the minimum consumer basket. It's a stillborn child. All employees are paying their income taxes regardless of the minimum consumer basket or minimum threshold. So when you will be looking at recommendation number 7, you should look why several important laws of the Republic of Armenia are not being fully implemented. So you have to look at the income, you have to deduct from the income the amount of the minimum basket, then you should actually tax the difference. And since 2018, or starting from 2018, there is a law that the budget should be prepared in programmatic way, and it should include non-financial indicators as well. So there should be some deadlines, should be some targets, some criteria, and from the state budgets, from the public agencies, it's impossible to receive any information about non-financial indicators. Probably this information is submitted only to the Ministry of Finance, but this information is not reaching other beneficiaries and stakeholders, including the National Assembly. This is one of the examples of non-transparent functioning of the government. We try to actually learn how much money is allocated to the NGOs. No information is available, even if there is information about recipients of this found there is no information about the outcomes. So we have an assessment of an independent expert that about 10 billion drams were allocated in the last 5 years to the NGOs. No information about the outcomes or impact. And I suggest to remove from the public television of Armenia advertisement, commercial advertisement of Beeline mobile operator and replace it with with social advertisement on the OGM. Another issue that OGM should discuss. It's on the compensation of the it's about the case law of the European Court of Human Rights when the court awards non-pecuniary damages to the applicants. So the issue is to look whether those amounts which are paid from the state budget are later on being compensated from the people who have committed errors leading to the application to the ECHR. Ethics Commission of highly ranked officials. I have looked on our website and checked whether the implementation of this action is considered to be implemented. So I believe that Mr. Kuriman knows our position, and I would like to reflect on those issues which are still some subject to discussion and debate, and also subject to further improvement. So I would like to join others who have expressed their gratitude, and I would like to say what happened to your report when you look at government decree number 150, which states that our commission has access to databases of different public authorities. This decision is in no way linked to your main agenda. It doesn't improve in any way the transparency to, and civil society is not getting anything as a result of different databases being accessible to us. So please correct this in your conclusions, and when you will submit further recommendations, please do not rely on this decree number 150. I have not read the text in English. I just shuffled through the pages, but whatever you have presented, there was an issue with the content of your presentation. It was not done correctly. It's not about declared assets. It's not the threshold of the declared assets. The decision was about thresholds which were in place at the time of disclosure of information, because the first one is in the law, the second one is in the government decree. So please make this correction as well. Third, whether it was important or not in this section where you were provided. Well, you're trying to do some impact assessment. I agree that this is your approach as an expert, and I don't want to question that. I would look at your impact assessment tool at a later stage, but I do believe that the purpose of our event was to make it to more professional journalists by removing the thresholds. We have been able to achieve this goal. So we made the information more accessible by removing the thresholds. And therefore, I would suggest that It's not minor, middle, or partial. I don't know how you have assessed that, or essential. You have actually look at the status yourself. But I will give you one figure. If you look at 2004 2013 results of first monitorings, when you were criticizing us that declarations are not available or accessible, at that time there were only 10 to 15 articles published in media. In 2015, we have more than 80 such articles and publications published based on the information disclosed in the declaration. I don't want to comment on the content of those articles because there are some serious discussions raising some serious issues, and of course there are also some articles on the level of rumors, but there was one information related to the issue of donations and conflict of interest system, etc. So your article you're referring to is actually proving the fact or witnessing about the fact that we have achieved our goal. So Head Online or others, the main online media outlets that are writing about this issue, are able to do that about the future. The fact that they are suggesting to make some transition for us, it is very important how many cases have been investigated, whether you have checked the validity of information, etc. There is no word about the prosecutor's office or investigation, but you are raising the issue of validating information. I'm telling you, validation is not a transparency issue. Validation is about identified facts, facts of unjustified enrichment, etc., or illegal, illicit enrichment, or disclosure of false information in the declarations. This is a completely different issue, and this was reflected by the OECD, Greco, and other international structures. But this is not in the framework of transparency. It cannot be addressed in this framework. We have several documents prepared, including documents prepared by us. If you want to develop this instrument, we cannot include it here. We have to do it under the capacity building or under the accountability development, not under transparency topic. Of course, we will publish on the websites in English and Armenian our own comments and interpretation. And I'm presenting you a position of the Commission. I would like you to review your own assessments. We talked a lot today about impact assessments. I don't know whether NGOs or public authorities represent here. Have you ever done an impact assessment report for any of the projects? So if you look at methodologies, they're quite difficult. The government tried actually to do that at some point, but one of the best methodologies is used by Great Britain. They do it through well-established organizations which have professionalized and specialized in this area. So it could be done only when there is a plan of action in place, when there are target indicators, when there are progress indicators, performance indicators, with specific deadlines and responsible agencies. In case of Armenia, there are no such targets set. So when Mr. Amirian said what actually changed in my life, how corruption has changed. Corruption cannot change only if you have, let's say, open partnership or under open partnership. And I agree with Mr. Oktanyan that corruption is much more, it's much deeper, it's more serious than simply transparency. Transparency can somewhat actually address the issue of corruption, but you cannot combat corruption or eradicate it only through increasing transparency. It would be too naive to believe that it's possible to do. And then speaking about the impact assessment or impact assessment report, it's impossible to do at this point. And last one. Here we talk about implementation reports. If we speak about aggregated program budgeting results, as Mr. Kuriman is saying, that many titles do not meet actually the content which we have under that title and topic. We speak about specific actions, not the program as a general or comprehensive unit. If you speak about corruption, there are many actions which are included in the action plan of the corruption strategy, anti-corruption strategy, and we can actually take some of the actions from there and make them part of our action plan. But let's not mix the action anti-corruption action plan with action plan of the OGM. So let's look on impact, let's say on improving transparency. What the OGM action plan provided in terms of transparency, I believe that the declaration system that was introduced by our ethics commission actually provided sufficient transparency, because I see that representatives of civil society, journalists, other stakeholders are actively involved in this process, and they actually use information from the declarations. And we are now discussing, we work with TI, Transparency International, with HEDC AM and with others in order to understand what at the third stage we can do in terms of increasing the transparency, making the tools more accessible, flexible. The last one, 2 minutes, please. 2 minutes, the last one. Sarkis Setrakin.
Հայաստանի Հանրապետության ռազմավարական ծրագրերի քաղաքացիական համագործակցության ցանցերի օրդինապարկ
Chairperson of the network of the strategic partnership with, or the partnership with the strategic programs of the government. You have done it, but it's not sufficient in order to make your work more targeted. One, it would be better for you to organize meetings and keep in touch with as many NGOs as you can. Of course, the NGO sector is well fragmented. There are some NGOs which have some monopolies in specific sectors. Nevertheless, we can find some ways of establishing cooperation and tackling joint problems, jointly tackling problems. We're a social partner to the government, and we have an agreement which helps us to cooperate along the lines of strategic programs, education, health, social issues, etc. And many organizations are involved here. And I would suggest that we would participate in this process with other beneficiary organizations, and this will be done for the benefit of the stakeholder organizations. I have nothing to tell a representative of the government, but following the agreement signed with the government, we work at the level of the deputy ministers in the working group, and we're also part of the coordinating council or the steering committee, where we have the prime minister chairpersons of standing committees of the National Assembly, ministers. So we are able to present the discourse of the civil society to top level public officials. Thank you again, and I believe that we can expand our cooperation and have more results in place. Thank you. I would like to make few brief observations and then
Ես ուզում եմ մի քանի բան հարցին անդրադառնամ։ Ես կարծում եմ շատ
I would like to say a few words.
հույս ունեինք ավելի ճիշտ, որ OGP-ն կդառնա բավականին լավ։
We had some hopes that OGP will become a very useful tool. We had no expectations that this will replace anti-corruption strategy or action plan. It was an additional auxiliary tool. So in 2001, the discussion started whether it should be governance partnership or government partnership. And the entire philosophy was determined by this topic. So the initial discussions were going along the line that it's an instrument to be used by the government. The government has not used this tool effectively. When in 2012, 2013, we launched the process, the government considered this as an opportunity to put in place e-governance system. So it was actually aiming this e-governance. Last year, the award which we received in Mexico, which was basically, let's say, the achievement of our foundation, and it was done through our grant. If I'm not mistaken, it's the Center for Educational and Innovative Technologies and IT Development. So this was presented as a way of transparent governance and management, though it was basically about e-governance. Of course, e-governance leads to accountability, transparency, and better governance, but it's not only about that. So when Asparas and Transparency International submitted a heavy envelope of recommendations to be incorporated, they would give you the figures, but from large number of different proposals, they have incorporated only few, one or two, which already showed that the partnership was not well done. However, there would be also some opinions about the way we translated it. Last year I was in Romania and met with my Georgian colleagues under this OGP. We met with advisor to the Prime Minister of Romania, who was coordinating the OGP, and he said it's a poor tendency, negative tendency, where open government was considered to be open management or open governance, leading to concentration and focusing specifically on e-governance, which was a good foundation to approach other organizations and receive additional grants to technologically solve this problem, but the tangible result of making it open government never materialized. It is not only evident in Armenia. In Romania and in Georgia, they also face the same problem. So when we speak about the declarations, I agree that this threshold was not an implementation criteria, because it doesn't address the problem of illicit enrichment. It's not an issue of open government or partnership. It's rather a criminal issue because now the illicit enrichment is being discussed in the criminal code and criminal proceedings code, but taking into account the situation with criminal proceedings codes and the uncertainty whether the code will be adopted, we have no certainty on this one. So by reducing the threshold or eradicating the threshold, we are not solving the problem. The transparency is in place, I agree with you. Head has published, for example, an article about the head of the chief bailiff of the country or head of the compulsory enforcement service. 2 years ago, had published another article about links between the prime minister and business people, and there are countries who dreamed of having 5% of the transparency that we enjoy here. But after this transparent publication, no changes, no further actions taken. If we link this to open government process, we see that even those mechanisms which are in place, which are implemented as part of the commitments, they are ineffective. I was not expecting to have any principal changes in 4 or 5 years as a result of this project, but I was expecting as a citizen of Armenia that in 5 year period it would be possible to put in place an effective mechanism that would make my participation in the government, in the governance of the country much more efficient. I agree with Mr. Khudaverdian that it's difficult to prepare an impact assessment report. And of course, I was not expecting to hear an answer to my question regarding this, but if we look forward and try to understand what would be our impact or what is the desired impact, in this case, we can simply at the initial stage actually plan our activities in a way that, at least in our imagination, would provide us with an opportunity to at least implement specific steps. I will go back and try to explain myself. So e-governance, which was heavily included in the first action plan, number of documents adopted, number of websites, online tools, document flow, electronic one, etc., etc. In terms of procurement, it was done. Technically, the platforms have been created, but with no impact. Because if you look at the data from the last year, 80% of procurement for last year was done from single source. So even if we do not expect a comprehensive impact assessment, we can at least plan to use this tool we can plan some actions for the second or third year in order to have some principal changes. I believe that this discussion was organized for the sake of showing interested people that there is an opportunity and there is nothing that we're limiting in any way. Open government partnership. And the whole format is such that you can write your opinion about the report, and we have to send to the site all recommendations in relation to the new action plan. Mr. Satrian said that they are thinking about a format that will provide receipt of proposals with recommendations from bigger number of users and stakeholders, but we had organized this discussion to once again sh- raise our concerns
օգտագործելու OGP-ի
related to better and more effective and efficient use of OGP opportunities and proposals, and also to understand to what extent the measurability principles are in place and to what extent the government and civil society have common understanding about the measurability. So, for example, transparency is in place, but the impact is not in place. Are we making this a problem, or are we going to think that whether we have to do some extra steps? Do we want to see OGP as a tool with more possibilities? Do we want to consider that to be part of the government's participation, or we simply make governance more transparent? Do we push them to publish on the website simply more information or all information that is subject to disclosure? If those are principal issues, if we agree around those issues, then we make our further actions more effective. If we do not reach an agreement around those issues, then one side will say that the report is positive, the others will say that it's negative. We will have different reading of what was implemented, what was not, and to what extent it is effective and useful. I don't know. I have difficulties of saying. So I will give 1 minute to each speaker for final comments if they want to reflect on the points raised, and then we will summarize. We'll start with Varujan Moktanyan. If you have anything to say, please. So, in my speech, I tried to speak about the global challenges that there are in the OGP around the world, and those problems simply show that they are fully reflected in Armenia. First and foremost, linked to the fact that the deadlines for independent reporting and funding issues are not in place, and specifically taking into account that there is a consensus that those are challenges at the global level. The issue would be to somehow address those challenges in the third action plan. That's the hope I have. Liana, please. Thank you. The issues that you have presented here are problems. And my last word is again to civil society representatives. We have to be owners of this process. We have to demand at least those approaches that David was referring to. We have to actually raise our voice, and we have to force the government to take this approach into account. At least our tactic of reaching results with small steps will be useful in this case, and I hope we'll be getting there. Mr. Asatiran. Thank you. I believe this event was quite successful. We have actually exhausted all possible time limits. Nevertheless, you all are still here. A few words about incorporating your recommendations and proposals and floating away from the OGP format. This is not something peculiar to Armenia. This is also present in many other countries because there was no clear understanding in terms of where this initiative will move. That's why many countries included e-governance as part of their action plan. As of positive progress in terms of implementation. This is something which is clearly stated by independent evaluators. It's not our own assessment, and I would like to thank for organizing this event specifically at this time. This is one of the crucial times. I won't say that it's decisive or paradigmatic, but nevertheless, we're moving to the third stage of action plan or third action plan, and therefore all the concerns that we have raised and you want to see in the action plan, it's actually the best time to present them. But give these